as well as those that will be in charge of killing and sharing of animals during the main burial event. Where the required items are to come from is usually not the business. It is often a strategy to ensure that at any of these ceremonies, their interests are well catered for. The end of the mourning period is often bad news for them, because it also signals the end of free food and drinks until the inevitable strikes another member of the family. Another member of the family. These folks may never be seen again. Since the people are predominantly Christians, the church has to be consulted. That the church equally demands these items, including illicit gin or snaps, before releasing the program for the burial of a deceased member to the family, shows how deeply entrenched the practice has been. Even before the church entertains the request of being part of the funeral ceremonies, it must be confirmed that the deceased person discharged all his financial obligations to the church. The church would not move an inch if all the obligations, including tithes, fees, and dues, are not completely met by the relations. If the deceased defaulted in any way, it is only when those conditions are met that the church would formally present its demand for participation and later confirm the dates for the funeral. Although it is commonplace, two instances come to mind when the church insists on collecting all that was due it before making a move. The first was in Ikoro Panabia. The church almost disrupted the funeral vigil when it discovered that schnapps was missing in the items sent to the clergy. The storekeeper deliberately skipped the item while packaging the items for the church, thinking that it might have been a mistake. Schnapps among the items for the church, the son of the deceased had to intervene and personally delivered a bottle of Seaman's aromatic schnapps to the clergy with profound apologies. He stunned the storekeeper that the church does not remove the African in us. The case at Afiancid was more intriguing. It was at the burial of a young woman. The church was consulted and the financial obligations were met. As requested by the local church council, mourners and sympathizers had all gathered for the funeral service, a very solemn one, because the deceased was a very young woman who died under very pitiable circumstances. Apart from the choristers who kept the occasion alive with choruses, no officer of the church was seen at the venue. Thinking that there might have been some issues with transportation, the chief mourner decided to go and find out at the home of the superintending pastor. He was shocked when he saw the man in underwear, relaxing in an easy chair in his sitting room. He told the pastor that all had been said and that it was the church that was holding up the burial. The pastor sneered at him. "You are set. What do you take us for? Did you give the drinks that we requested? If you are ready, go ahead and bury your dead now. Look, let me tell you, if you don't give the drinks we requested, you won't see any of us there. That is how you people behave. You think because we are church members, we will take every nonsense. You think we do not know that the moment the corpse is lowered into the grave, you will all disappear. And we won't see any of you again." The chief mourner was stunned. To save the situation, he offered cash in lieu of the drink, as he pleaded that his visitors and sympathizers were out there waiting. Some of them came from afar and would like to return home in good time. The pastor collected the money and told the man to run along, that he will meet him at the venue. Not quite 30 minutes. The entire church ensemble was there, singing and dancing in a manner that suggested that the angels were coming down to physically take the corpse straight to heaven. As it was a wonder what dreams are capable of doing. Curiously, the practice of reaping from the dead, even with the level of enlightenment in the society, is not in a hurry to go away. Some of the younger ones who grow up in the local communities are still following in the footsteps of their fathers and do not show any serious signs of letting up. They use threats to sustain it. They often threaten to invoke the spirits of their ancestors against those who are intent on shifting the boundaries of ages. They would say, our grandfathers used to do it like this, and it will not be in our time that this tradition will be desecrated. Unfortunately, the custom requires that the dead be buried in their ancestral homes, even though that is no longer sacrosanct. Even then, there must be a strong reason for not bringing the dead to the land of his forebears, no matter the reason. The consultations must be done and penalties settled. However, if you cannot but suspect that those insistent on those traditional exactitudes see the departed as better than alive, however, if you cannot but suspect that those insistent on those traditional exactitudes see the departed as better than dead. Chapter 5. Traditional courts still potent. Strife has always been with mankind. In fact, it is an integral nature of man. Since creation, man has often moved away from charted paths and once in a while needs to be brought back to sanity. If the society is to have some peace, mankind is supposed to live in peace within the society. The society only enjoys the phenomenon at the mercy of mankind. So society had to devise a means of maintaining peace so that the rest of mankind can live in peace. Blissful peace has continued to elude mankind nonetheless. One of the most troubling challenges in Nigeria today is getting justice. It is particularly so if one gets entangled in a matter in which the culprit is a big man. A big man is someone who has acquired true wealth, who has acquired enough wealth to influence situations in the society. This situation is predominant in the cosmopolitan cities, where formal courts decide on infractions. In local communities, traditional courts hold sway, although they are not entirely isolated from the corruption virus. Even before the advent of the British colonial administration, which came with the formal courts and statutes, traditional societies in Nigeria and indeed Africa had their own ways of resolving conflicts in line with their peculiar customs and traditions. The courts are quite potent, and decisions were strictly enforced. The Ibibio people, who occupy a larger chunk of what is Akwa Ibom State today, and who claimed to be the fourth largest ethnic group in Nigeria, had long established a system of resolving conflicts within their societies, whether such were among individuals, groups, or communities. They instituted duly centralized conflict resolution institutions. Issues within a particular family, no matter how extended, were handled by elders of the community, while those among members, individuals of different families and groups and of the community were handled by the village council, with the village head as the chief judge. It seems the colonial masters fashioned out the customary court system after this structure, as it handled much bigger matters that were clearly outside the jurisdiction of family courts or units. The village council was made up of the village head, his deputy, the village secretary, and selected elders of impeccable character. The mode of operation of the traditional court was not very distinct from what it is today, or what is today being practiced in the form of courts, except that in the formal courts, there are strict protocols which are largely universal in observance, whereas in the traditional courts, the mode of operation was peculiar to the norms and values of particular societies. The status was derived from the norms, values, and conventions of the society. Judgment were delivered based on the common experience of members of the village council, in line with the cultural values and conventions of that particular society. The status of the defendant were also taken into consideration when awarding penalties. It is noteworthy that even with the regular courts, intractable cases are usually withdrawn and taken back to the traditional courts for settlement, especially those bordering on land and matrimonial issues. The courts were quite potent and decisions were strictly enforced, no matter who was affected. The enforcement was in most cases carried out by masquerades, particularly if an injunction was flouted. The traditional injunction was issued through a tender palm front. Once that is placed on a property, it means the status quo must be maintained until final determination of the matter. About 3 decades ago, an ex-soldier in Ikondien in Readmania, who was just discharged from service, returned to his community, where he got entangled in a land tussle. The other party reported the matter to the traditional institution, and a tender palm front was issued and placed on the disputed piece of land to signify that the land was under arbitration. The ex-soldier disregarded the injunction, removed the palm front, and took possession of the land. It was an abomination to remove a traditional injunction arbitrarily. Such acts were viewed seriously. The plaintiff reported the trespass to the traditional institution, and the ex-soldier thenceforth knew no peace until he died in another community which he fled to. The moment he was reported, Igbo masquerades, which usually acted as the traditional bailiffs, invaded the community from all over, chasing the ex-soldier left, right, and center. It was no longer at ease within the community, so he fled to another community he never returned to his community alive. With almost a century since the Oriental Judicial Administration was introduced into the Nigerian society, it was a pleasant surprise to observe that some communities are still employing the traditional framework to resolve matters, no matter the scope, even across village boundaries, as was the case not too long ago in Ikorakpanabia, Ubium. In a civilized society, it is a serious offense for a child to insult his parents, talk less of engaging them in physical combat. It was an abomination in those days, in the traditional societies, an offense which parents denounced their children. It was much more regarded as in the Bibio tradition, it was much more regarded in the Bibio traditional society. It could be appropriately said that a certain young man from Adianset did not know this, but for some inexplicable reasons, and often in the heat of anger, certain actions are taken for which the actor regrets later at very great loss to themselves. This young man, who was in his late 20s, found himself in such a situation. For whatever reason, the young man, whose village was just few meters away from his maternal home, had a misunderstanding with his mother. The woman was married to a man in Nadia. The young man was therefore a grandson in Ikorakpanabia, the mother's village. This fellow did not only verbally assault the mother, he made an attempt on her life, but for the intervention of the neighbors, who promptly restrained him. Even though he eventually did not carry out his intention, the mere attempt was enough for the charge of abomination to be hung on his neck. In that community, a child could also get away with assaulting the father. Not so with the mother. Not with threatening the mother with a machete. The mother, who did not just feel threatened, she was very bitter that her son would make an attempt on her life, in spite of all that she has done for him, including carrying him in her womb for 9 months and on her back for over a year. She promptly denounced him as her son after lodging a formal complaint with her husband, the young man's father. Having registered her displeasure with the immediate heads of the family, the woman mounted her bicycle and headed for her own village to report to her own people the abomination committed by their grandchild. It was natural to exaggerate such issues to attract attention, sympathy, and therefore severe sanctions. But in that society, a maternal grandchild was highly regarded and is still. In fact, if a grandchild visits the maternal home, he is treated as some kind of a god. If he unwittingly does something wrong, he is forgiven immediately. He is immune to curses put on certain objects and untoward behavior in the maternal community, provided he does not get out of his way to deliberately desecrate sacred places and objects. That same society disavows in the strictest manner any form of insult on the family by a grandchild, even if on the maternal side. This was where the woman derived the impetus to file her report, and that is also why the young man found himself in trouble. He was therefore summoned. Such a summon goes with a cause, and so no one dares to ignore it because of the very serious implications. Having lived all his life in the local communities, he knew the consequence of looking the other way. Unfortunately for the young man, her mother was from one of the ruling houses in the community. That compounded his problem because the insult was seen beyond the woman as it was extended to the family, in this case a royal family. The traditional court, that is family court, was immediately convened, and the young man was tried and found guilty of putting an abomination to it, threatening the mother, and in the process disgracing the family before the entire community. He was seen as a very recalcitrant and disrespectful child who, by his action, attempted to bring eternal disgrace and curse to the family. His action was tantamount to portraying the family as incapable of bringing up good children, and by extension, a potential risk to the community. He did not have much of a defense because no excuse was good enough for attacking his mother, even if the mother genuinely offended him. There are other avenues he could have explored for redress. Joining issues to the point of open altercation and attempted physical assault was a prima facie case of an abomination, and so he was accordingly found guilty as charged. And even if he had the slightest justification, the problem with the traditional court is that its decisions are not subject to any form of appeal. The only exception probably would be if the matter was against the community, in which case one might appeal to the village council for retrial. If it became serious, the justice was miscarried. If it became obvious that justice was miscarried at the first sitting, this man's case was different. Whatever justification he had was This man's case was different. Whatever justification he had was no immunity for an attack on his mother. He could have reported to his father or to the village council if the family failed to handle the matter satisfactorily. He did none of this. He was therefore fined one he-goat, whose nostrils must be wide enough to freely pass an adult's forefinger, a carton of beer, 1 bottle of illicit gin, a small bottle of tobacco powder, snuff, and a head of yam, 5 tubers. Since the items are usually prepared and consumed after the court sitting, he also had to provide other condiments needed for the preparation. A date was set aside for the presentation of the items. However, before that day is convened, he is expected to have shown enough remorse, otherwise the items will be rejected and he will be banned from visiting the maternal home. On the appointed date, senior members of the family converged at the home of the family head, where the jury sat. The young man and his other brothers were there waiting. His mother and her people were also there. His family, having made his displeasure known, would not honor him with his presence. In the face of such a despicable development, he was called out. He looked thoroughly sober. It was pardonable to play pranks with the father's people, definitely not with the mother's. But the intriguing part of it is that the same people who berated the man and fined him on the day of the trial were the same who pleaded for forgiveness on his behalf on the day the items were presented. That was usually the tradition. You do not throw away the baby with the bathwater. You chastise with the left hand and draw back with the right. This was even more so in a society where grandchildren are revered. In the Ubiom community, they are called Ipaisang, a solid or revered ground. Prayers of forgiveness were offered, and the mother was called upon to first and foremost withdraw the renunciation, and then pronounce blessings upon him, embrace him, and take him back as her son. Mothers are mothers, even when very bitter. They still wish that whatever happened never happened in the first place. On the second thought, she would wish she never went that far. But again, she would reason that if something was not done about such traits, the son would end up killing her one day. Sometimes the reporting and trial may not be out of extreme spite, but precautionary, to help correct the child and bring him back on the path of rectitude. The woman who, with tears in her eyes, readily gripped the son in warm embrace. The elder sternly warned him not to allow a repeat of the development. He made the promise. It was at that point that the items were accepted and the politics of sharing began. One very interesting experience is the politics of sharing meat in the local communities, particularly at such occasions. Every part of the animal, in this case the goat and cow, has special significance and must be given to particular persons based on their hierarchy in the family or the community, as the case may be. Although there are slight variations across communities, there seems to be some similarities that cut across a number of communities with similar culture. For instance, in the family, the waist is reserved for the head of the family. The tongue goes to the deputy. The legs and arms are for some designated senior members of the family. Some designated parts, abagarat, it goes to the sharer, while the rest of the parts are cooked and shared among everyone present. For the community, the waste similarly goes to the village head. The head goes to the family of the immediate past village head. The legs and hands go to some designated families. The town crier gets the area around the groin. The area between the torso and the waist, ekikoi, is usually reserved for the village secretary, while the rest of the parts are shared among others. The sharers are also entitled to portions. The animal must be killed while the meeting is winding down and must be shared before the eventual close of the meeting. In most families, and even in the village councils, there are persons specially designated to handle the assignment of sharing of killing and sharing the meat. These are people who are well versed in the politics of ceremonial meat sharing in such communities. An agreed formula is adopted and it is conventional. It may sound petty and simple in the ears of those who do not know, but this is one venture that has led to strife between families and eventual loss of life and property when mismanaged, and it has severally. Any mistake in the killing, roasting, and sharing of the meat in life in itself might earn the person involved a fine of a bigger version of the animal, a keg of palm wine, and a bottle of hot drink. But a mistake in sharing among the people, offices, family groups, or community groups could be very fatal. It could generate so much bad blood between the affected individual and the concerned group of persons, such that would beggar belief. By the time the story is told, it is usually difficult to comprehend that the cause of the furor was just a miscalculation in sharing of goat meat. Some people are known to have been killed or just died mysteriously because of the seemingly very simple matter. Several families are not in good terms with each other because of issues arising from a breach or otherwise in the sharing formula. That is why only persons who are well versed in the matter are allowed to handle the assignment to avert unnecessary reproofs. Typical community folks do not joke with things traditional. They hate interference of Western styles with the way they chose to live their lives, and they do not seem to care what those who do not share in their perspective think about them or their acts. They just want to be that way, and once you are in the community, you must do things their way. There was this very enterprising young man who had lived his life almost certainly entirely outside the country. His father was an international figure and was well regarded both in the country and his native community. The young man did not understand why in this modern age his people should still be indulging in the primitive lifestyle of eating and drinking like ruminants. He did not also understand why the village folks lacked respect for people who are evidently more accomplished simply because they do not live among them in the community and do the things they do. A very conservative young man, ordinarily, he would not want to have anything to do with the petty type of politics played in this country. But to keep the family name in general glare, he was conscripted and convinced to contest for political office. That development did not only bring him closer to his people, it left him at their mercy. The people were excited that at last they have netted him because he scarcely visited home before then. Having heard that he was home for the first time in several years, young men of his kindred went to his father's compound to felicitate with him, as is customary in the local communities. They actually wanted to confirm the story that he was interested in representing the area in Parliament. The man, who was also excited to see them, went into the inner room and emerged with a bottle of candy and 6 glass cups. Having counted the number of persons in the sitting room, he dropped each of the cups in front of the people and poured a measure of the drink into each cup. Done, he placed the cup back in the pack and was about to return the stuff to the wine cellar when one of the young men stood up and barked, "Bring that drink back here." "What do you think you are doing? Returning a drink we've not even started to take?" "Look, my friend, let me tell you, your late father would not attempt that nonsense. Drop that bottle on this table and go and find a place and sit down." "Nonsense." The man was stunned at the effrontery, but he reluctantly obeyed and sat down a little away from them. In less than an hour, the 1-liter bottle of brandy was empty, and the guys were not remorseful one bit. When they had left, the man started wondering whether, given his own personal orientation, representing such seemingly incorrigible people in the Parliament was a worthwhile thing to do. He was used to the culture where offering drinks to visitors was a sign of courtesy, where visitors are served a measure of drinks as determined by the host. It was strange to find where drinks were demanded as a matter of right, and where it is not offered, it becomes an offense for which the culprit must be vilified and blackmailed. It was strange to him that drinks and food are used as enablers of critical decision making, as well as sanctions for irregular and irresponsible conduct. Chapter 6. Boki young men were lucky. There was a time in Boki clan when, if a young man of a certain age grade remained unmarried, it was immediately concluded that he simply did not want to marry. If the excuse was he was in any way linked with how to fund the marriage, he would instantly be told to look for a more believable lie, because that sermon was not going to win any convert. However, such an excuse might suffice if the claim pertains to a search outside Boki, but certainly not within the clan. The Boki people occupy somewhere close to the northern fringes of Cross River State, in an area known today as Boki Local Government Area. Boki is surrounded by Ikom, Ogweja, and the Republic of Cameroon. The people are sandwiched between the Ejagam and the Kwara ethnic communities. It is one of the biggest and most prominent clans in the state. It has produced very prominent sons who have made exploits at national and international arenas. Its location makes its neighborhood to the three. Its location makes it neighbor to the three other local council areas of Ogoja, Obudu, and Ikom, which also have distinct ethnic orientations and therefore different cultures. Being surrounded by these different cultures, Boki is influenced by snipers of their respective norms and values. It therefore sits as a confluence of the traditions of 4 local government areas, thus getting off with a richer cultural repertoire. Besieged by a myriad of traditional and cultural values, the clan, just like any entity with selective instincts, seems to place higher value on some over others. One of such traditional values which has lived through the ages and still remain very close to the communal heart of the Boki people is the traditional marriage institution. The traditional marriage in Boki land is one of the most revered and practiced codes in the people's life. It is one tradition that has remained almost inviolate, but for slight tinkering here and there, caused mainly by the infiltration of modernity. Unlike in most places where very young people are given out for marriage, the Boki people had from time indicated an ideal minimum age which young fellows were encouraged to take a leap into marriage. Barring circumstances that are beyond anticipation, the age specification as seriously considered for marriage to be contracted. For men, the ideal age was 25, while a 21-year-old girl was ripe enough to be admitted into the institution. In those days, across the eastern region, people belonged to age grades, and there were certain activities that were strictly on age grade basis. Marriage was one of such. It was a huge thing of monumental shame and extreme ridicule if a member of a relevant age grade, to still remain in his father's homestead, eating his mother's food, when all his age mates had long started their own homes. He was the scum of society and the butt of jokes among his peers and the young women of the community. At the slightest provocation, the offended, particularly a young woman, would fire back. Don't go and get married like your mates. Hang around the village constituting yourself into a nuisance. Suckling old fool. Once that happens, the young man would go dumb and retreat immediately. Although these age categorizations were sacrosanct in the days of the convention, modernity has defied that sanctity, just as has been in a good number of other traditional norms and values. Traditional marriages has been subjected to intense rape and brutal pummeling by modernity. The confusion that has been introduced into the rite over the years has beclouded the real essence and sanctity of traditional marriages. The traditional flavor is no longer as spicy as it was in the days when things were done according to their classification. One aspect that held on in Boki clan, even up to the very date in 1980, in spite of the battering, was the traditional bride price. It was neither affected by the exchange rate fluctuations nor any other market forces. In the days which the Queen's money was the legal tender, it was just 12 shillings. Even in the 1900s, it remained the converted value of 1 naira 20 kobo. Currently, currency devaluation and inflation notwithstanding, the procedure of marriage in the clan was just like any other, except in this case the elaborate ceremonies were completely out of it. Even now, it is optional, and that is if a family of means wants to show class. In spite of that, the traditional dowry remains the same, no matter how affluent the families involved are. Even as the traditional dowry was fixed by custom, there were other instant payments depending on the status of the bride-to-be. But these were just tokens. Normally, the suitor must have seen his heartthrob and must have let the bride-to-be into his mind. Once there was an agreement between the two, or their families, as the case might be, the rites begin. This is another area that modernity has with. This is another area that modernity has with. In the days of strict tradition, it was largely the parents' affair. The would-be couple only came in when their families must have given their consent to the union. Now, those directly concerned have a say. In fact, they have the say. It starts with their concerns and ends with their consent in most cases. It was at the consent-seeking stage, which was usually reached at a ceremony known as belt tying or rope tying, that the young people would be allowed to see themselves formally. Formally for the first time, even though prior to that time they might have been seen secretly without the knowledge of the family, or without the knowledge of their parents or the elders. Tradition actually forbade such prior meetings, and in some cases, it had implications. The ceremony of introduction and consent seeking was widely known as knocking on the door. It was so known in the entire stretch of what used to be the eastern region, shortly before the Nigerian Civil War strife degenerated into a full-blown military confrontation. After the door-knocking ceremony, a reasonable period of time was allowed in between for preparation for the main marriage ceremony, and this largely depended on the capacity of the family of the would-be husband. Within this period, the would-be husband takes the would-be wife to the market on the main market day in the community to buy her immediate needs and other items required for the main ceremony. The real marriage process, known as debe, begins with the payment of the dowry called akbuga debe, which is, as earlier stated, was 1 naira 20 kobo. Irrespective of status, provision was usually made for logistics and other forms of burden that the bride's parents might have borne on her account. That payment is called akbuga bankbonge, yet another amount depending on the financial capacity and magnanimity of the husband-to-be was customarily given to her friends as compensation for snatching her away from them. As earlier indicated, there were tokens of appreciation from the suitor himself. Other items, including wraps of clothing, a tin of palm oil, a head of tobacco, a pot of cola nuts, some bottles of hot drinks, specified kegs of palm wine, walking sticks, and some other miscellaneous items accompany the marriage train to the parents of the would-be wife. All done, the marriage is contracted, and the couple henceforth are qualified to be addressed as husband and wife with full rights and privileges. However, the wife was not expected to follow the husband home immediately. A period of between 2 to 3 weeks was allowed, during which time the new wife is taken through what it takes to be a good wife. This was usually handled by the wife's mother, if still alive. Otherwise, an elderly woman in the family would perform the function. During this period, the husband would be allowed to visit and spend some time with her. The end of the induction period and the commencement of procession to the husband's home were usually signaled by the firing of some gunshots known as the Che Okwa Debe. This was believed to scare away trouble from the new family. Once that is done, at nightfall, the wife's mother and her friends, carrying loads of household utensils and food items, would escort the new wife to her husband's house. Although the process was largely similar to what obtained in most parts of what used to be southeastern states, the difference was significantly on the amount of dowry and the list of items to be presented to the bride's family. In some communities, particularly in the area that was known as the mainland part of the state, the list was quite long and in some cases scary. Some would require an entire wardrobe, including shoes and wristwatches, for both the father and mother-in-law, and a long list of items for the immediate and extended families. The ceremonies themselves would entail a lot of drama during the door knocking and also the main event. Even in Ibibioland, in the mainland part of what was southeastern state, then it was not really the main dowry that scared a lot of young men, but the long list of items. Even in Ibibioland, in the mainland part of what was southeastern state, It was not really the main dowry that scared a lot of young men, but the long list of items. Some families would be so trenchant about the items that suitors' families might be embarrassed during the ceremony if anything on the list is missing. This often happens if the woman's family is not so excited about the choice of the husband by their daughter. They would try to put obstacles on the way just to scare away the suitor. No matter how considerate the family might be, they often would insist that all items belonging to the extended family must be presented and cheerfully received to avoid some implications that may arise due to traditional invocations. No matter how considerate the family might be, they often would insist that all items belonging to the extended family must be presented and cheerfully received to avoid some implications that may arise due to traditional invocations by some not too decent fellows in the family. Every family seems to have such fellows, and every necessary thing must be done to avoid giving them the opportunity and eventual justification to unleash their evil enterprise. Another major consideration usually would be that of the mother. In matters of marriage, even till this day, mothers are normally given pride of place. Women do not trifle with clothes and trinkets. Wrappers for the mother were usually clearly specified and must include akwete or george or damask or a combination of them. In some cultures, like in the nearby Igbo-speaking areas, a portmanteau full of dresses would be required. The father is usually considerate and might forfeit part of what should go to him if his intending in-laws are not financially capable of covering the entire list. A must in the father's list was a walking stick, while a similar item in the mother's side was the umbrella. In the southeastern mainland, what is known today as Akwa Ibom State, one interesting aspect of the ceremony, which still remains so till today, is the fetching of the bride. Apart from the day of tying the rope, the wife-to-be was not expected to be seen in that capacity or identifying openly with the intending husband until formally presented at the traditional marriage ceremony. On the first day, she would only be brought out to be identified and confirmed as the person whose hand is being sought. On that day, the narrative is usually interesting, depending on the area. The suitor would not directly indicate that they are there to look for a wife. They would say that they saw a beautiful flower in the compound and would want to pluck it. But before doing so, they need to obtain permission from the owners of the compound. The team must be led by elders from the suitor's family. It is usually a small gathering of both families in the compound of the girl's father. Yeah, this will be a rather. That's it.